and accused them.
If he knew that somebody had done it, he could well have chosen to keep quiet. Because,
But
as I said earlier, his enemies would have blamed him, he may have felt guilty himself, he may have wished to keep his enemies guessing as to whether the boys were still alive. It was important that Henry Tudor shouldn't know whether they were alive or dead. There are plenty of reasons why he wouldn't have said it.
But in reality, the only possible reason for him keeping quiet was because he knew perfectly well that it could only be to his detriment because he must have been a party to it.
No, I don't accept that.
Finally,
May I just ask one further question on the bones?
Lord,
it would
please.
have been a very remarkable coincidence if it happened that two other children of about this age were both found in a box in non-consecrated ground in the Tower. But you say, no, they weren't the princes. It's a very strange coincidence.
There were two other bodies discovered some 30 years earlier.
Of children?
Of children. There was another one which was subsequently discovered to be one of the Tower apes. But the date, the dates of the bodies are not known. They could be Roman, the skeletons. I mean, we're going through hundreds of years, possibly. All that we know is that the bones are pre-1674.
Yeah.
And the Tower was a well-inhabited building throughout the Middle Ages.
Mr. Potter, of course, I mean, you have to say that, don't you? You cannot accept that those bones are almost certainly, don't put it anyhow than that, almost certainly the bones of the princes, because it blows a lot of the Ricardian argument sky high, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Let me ask you about one or two questions.
It only blows sky high those who thought that Henry Tudor had done it, which is a position that I have never occupied, and which, as far as I know, very few people suggest now.
No, I think that's right.
That was the whole point about it. It was said that it had altered the date, so they had to have been killed in 83, and Henry Tudor...
I must leave that topic, Mr. Potter, because I have to ask you about two other things. I want to ask you a question about Buckingham and then about the release of the daughters from the sanctuary. Let's assume, for the purposes of these questions, that Buckingham did in fact, or was a major party to the killing of the princes. Because if Richard is responsible, Buckingham almost certainly was. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm deeply suspicious of Buckingham,
Yes.
I'll say that, yes.
Well, now, and let's assume that he had a motive of his own. Perhaps he saw them as getting rid of them as a way to the crown for himself in due course.
And also blackening Richard's name, yes.
Yes, but that's a very weak argument, isn't it, Mr. Potter?
No, I don't think it
you're
is at
not
all.
seriously suggesting that Buckingham would go into the Tower and murder those two boys in order to be able to let it be mooted abroad that Richard might have done it and so blacken his name. You're not really suggesting that.
Plus clearing his own way for the throne. The double.
As his lordship was saying to you, it's almost inconceivable, isn't it? It would have been a tremendous step for Buckingham to take to have done this, if I may use the expression, off his own bat.
Buckingham was a very unstable character, so I think is generally agreed.
Is there any evidence at all, anywhere, from anybody, to suggest that Buckingham had done that murder on his own?
Well, it depends how you read some of the chronicles. I mean, the College of Arms one says that the boys were killed
on the Vice.
On the Vice. And,
Yeah,
and you
but
can
that
either
means-
say that's on the advice, or you can say it's by the device of.
But
If it
that's
was
not
by-
evidence that he did it on his own.
Yeah, if you read it as device, which is just as good,
Yes.
and Buckingham and Richard is not mentioned, it is a possible indication that Buckingham did it on his own.
Yes. Well, now, you have been saying that Buckingham had lots of opportunity because he stayed in London after the coronation. Any evidence to support that?
Yes, the king went to Oxford
For a
and
dinner at Magdalen College. And Buckingham wasn't on the guest list. That was 10 days or so after the coronation. I forget the precise date. But it doesn't mean to say Buckingham was in London, does it?
no.
No. Well, that's what
But I think it is said that Buckingham joined Richard at Gloucester
on the
from
20
London.
No,
Because he
with
went on
respect-
to Brecon.
No, with respect, not from London. He next turns up in Gloucester, I think on the 29th of July, and goes on to Brecknock.
Well, let's accept it.
All I want to establish is a lot of your questions in answer to my learned friend have been upon the basis that Buckingham stayed behind in London, and all I'm suggesting to you is there's not a shred of evidence to support that.
It is a presumption that if he wasn't at Oxford, that he wasn't on the Royal Progress, and that he would have stayed in London. It is a presumption for which there is no evidence.
And if Buckingham had done it, there was absolutely no reason for Richard not to accuse him, at least at the time of his execution for treason after the rebellion in October.
Well, I think there is, and I've stated those reasons before. It is very significant that after the meeting at Gloucester, it was then that Buckingham went off to Brecon and joined the other side. And my interpretation of that is that the quarrel between Buckingham and Richard was over the murder of the princes. They never met again. Richard called him the most untrue creature living and refused to meet him before his execution at Salisbury.
And that was the moment and the opportunity for him to say, Buckingham, you are a murderer, arrest him, try him, and execute him, before he had a chance to join the rebellion which was then mounting itself.
Buckingham was far too powerful to be arrested immediately at short notice.
Hastings had been disposed of within half an hour.
Hastings was in London, where Richard had the power. Gloucester was in the West Country, where Buckingham had his power base.
And finally, Mr. Potter, Elizabeth, how should we describe her? She was a pretty tough lady, wasn't she? Not a very popular lady. She was in this position, wasn't she? There she was with her 5 daughters, being in Westminster Abbey, in the sanctuary there, for, I think, in the abbot's house she was she not? In the abbot's house for 9 months or so, or getting on for a year. Sanctuary wasn't all that safe in any event, was it? I mean, they could have been removed at any time.
Yes, I mean it was unlikely, but there
there's
were
precedent
possibilities.
for that. I mean, sanctuary had been broken by force on other occasions.
Well, not, I think, where women were involved. It was, again, it was the Tudors that killed women, but not the Plantagenets.
There was little prospect at that time of any challenge to Richard, was there not?
No.
She was really faced with this situation. She either stayed there and let her daughters grow up for another year or two in sanctuary, or she accepted the offer which was made by Richard. And the offer was a fairly handsome one, wasn't it? He gave many pledges as to what he would do with the daughters, as to their safety and marrying them off and so on.
Yes.
Yes. So she had Richard's assurance. She really had no alternative but to let those girls out, and Richard didn't really care about the women in the family, did he?
Henry Tudor had said that he would marry Elizabeth of York. He'd sworn on the high altar at Wren Cathedral the previous Christmas. He had got the support of the dissident Yorkists by saying that she was most important to Richard.
Now, that is the point, is it not? That autumn rebellion, which maybe it started to free the princes, maybe it started in some other way, but it ended up with Yorkists changing camp and supporting a Tudor claimant, a Lancastrian claimant to the throne in the person of Henry Tudor.
These were southerners who had been deprived of their estates by Richard's northerners.
And
this was a north-south
They were
argument.
southerners, and they were pro-Edward IV and Edward V loyalists to a man.
Well, you say to a man, I mean, there were a handful of them. Most people didn't leave the south of England for Brittany.
But the rebellion went through, what, 7 counties?
A very small number of people involved, easily put down.
Well, it was easily put down because there was very few troops, in fact, around them. And Henry Tudor, on his way over the Channel, hit a storm, and the 2,000 men he was bringing over never got there.
A very small number of people in the south of England. It was
It was
widespread.
The reason why Yorkists espoused their cause and supported a Lancastrian on the throne, or possibly on the throne, in the person of Henry Tudor, was because they were so appalled at Richard's treatment of the princes.
The Croyland Chronicler specifically says that they were concerned about the plantation of northerners in the south.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Potter.
Mr. Lordship has